life is full of really, really uninteresting, mundane moments. And that's where God's found. He's found in those mundane moments where we have to trust in him when we don't see what's next.
Hello, welcome back to Answer the Call podcast. As I say on every episode, I'm so excited. And sometimes I think I need to kind of rephrase that and say something else. But honestly, I'm just so excited to share another story. We have another client success story, a clarity success story to share. So I have Travis here with us today, and we're going to talk about his unique clarity journey, his really interesting clarity journey, kind of like a full circle moment. I don't know, however you want to say it, but I will let you introduce yourself or just say hi, Travis, if you want to share what you were doing before you started career coaching, what you're doing now, and we'll get into all of the in between a little bit later on.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Audrey. I appreciate it. It's been, like you said, kind of an interesting and unique journey. Maybe not so unique. There are probably a lot of people that have gone through it, but they're not sharing their story today. And maybe it will resonate with some as they're leading in or maybe even deciding what they want to do moving forward. So I guess a little bit of background. I don't know how far back I want to go, but I'll start in the last couple of years. Well, we can even go broader than that. So like I'd recently been married. This is my second marriage. I'm a blended family. And so I lost my wife and my current wife, she lost her husband a few years ago. And so we've blended our family and we've moved. I used to live in the Midwest, moved out to the East Coast. In all that time, there were a lot of career changes that were taking place. I used to work, well, I'm a creative director, and so I worked in-house at an agency, which I've done for the past 20 years, 20 plus years. And COVID happened and all of that, and the whole world shut down and everybody went remote, and including me. It gave me an opportunity to move out to the East Coast at that time in 2021. And I was able to keep my old job and work remote, which was an amazing blessing and something that you couldn't have anticipated. And it was something that I needed for my family at the time because we were a blended family. I have 4 teenagers. And so I felt really blessed by that. And I worked for this agency that I had worked for 5 years, and I loved it when I started. And kind of the veneer wore off after time. I mean, I'd gone through so many life changes. I got to a point where I felt like I wasn't the right fit for the type of work that I was doing anymore. And I was getting continually frustrated by sort of passivity that I saw within the workplace. I was constantly having sort of internal infighting and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of this I've repented of because there were things that I was expressing frustration in and I shouldn't have. And so I actually was given another opportunity at a new agency. It was a relatively young startup. And it was kind of the exact opposite. It was this really volatile, passive aggressive. It was sort of flying by the seat of its pants, all that sort of stuff. And I was excited and drawn to it because of the caliber of work that they did. And it didn't take long. I think I was working there for a couple of months. And the main owner, he left. The other one was trying to hold down the fort, and he couldn't handle it. And that sort of stuff trickles down. I'm very much an empath, if you will. Like I'm very much affected by the environment that I'm in, and sort of it wore me down and wore me down and wore me down. I got to a place just last year where I was really thinking, this is not for me anymore. I cannot stay on the creative industry. Like, what am I doing as a creative director? This isn't a good fit for me anymore. Did I make the wrong decision? All of that sort of stuff. And so I got to a point where things came to a head, and the agency actually folded. And I was given a pretty clear direction in that there was no option anymore for me to just kind of keep pushing things off and being like, I'm really, really frustrated, but I'm going to push through it. And that's how I've always operated. I'll just push through it. And that all came to a halt. And so I was put in this position of, okay, now what? And, but also like, now what? I've been given an awesome opportunity. And we were financially able to do it. And so I thought, let me just take some time off and let me reassess where I'm at right now and where I could potentially be moving forward. So that's kind of a long way to tell you that story.
Yeah. No, I think there's so many things in there that people can relate to, like having an issue with your job and wondering, you had mentioned, did I make a mistake coming to this job? Should I not be in this industry? Am I done with this kind of work? All of these questions that consistently circulate and potentially lead to spiraling. So, but something that I picked up on, I mean, when we first started our sessions together, very much picked up on this. And then also just in your story there, that resilience is something that has always been really core value of yours. And that's something that we talked about as well. So can you talk a little bit and share how did your view on resilience change from gritting your teeth, sticking through it, just got to get through this, to then not having a job anymore and being in that space of, okay, well, how did resilience look different in that?
Yeah. And you could say resilience, and you could also say I'm a bit stubborn.
They're very closely tied together.
And so there was, I guess there was always been this factor of, God, you have me in this place. The last job that I had, it just came about. And I was the previous job that I had, I was really, really getting burned out, but I just kept, kind of putting my head down and bashing through walls and being like, well, this is where I'm at right now. And praying at the same time of, God, why do you have me here? Like, this is really, really hard. And so, the owner of the company, the last company, he called me up out of the blue, and I hadn't talked to him in like 5 years. And he goes, I remember you, and I liked the cut of your jib. I like, like how you work and your personality and all of that. And will you come here? And I'd already known their personalities, and I was like, I don't know if I want to work there. But they pursued me and I kept pushing back, and they pursued me. And I was like, God, if you want to open these doors, like I'll walk through it, like close that door. If you don't want me to walk through that door. And he opened it up. He opened it wide. And so I walked right through it. And at that last agency for months, and it was challenging for months and months, from the get-go. I was continually talking to God and saying, like, this is really, really challenging. Why do you have me here? Why do you have me here? Why do you have me here? And it all became like very, very self-focused as well. But it wore me down, So we talk about resilience, and it's something that I feel like, I mean, I'm 46 now. That's how stubborn I can be and how resilient I can be, is that for 20 years, I've always pursued or gone with the idea that life is challenging. We all know that. I'm not going to really do anything to rock the boat. I'm just going to live within this environment and just push through and push past all of this sort of stuff. And that can be a very, very passive approach, right? Like, you're being active and like moving forward, but you're not doing anything to change the situation. And so you're continually getting defeated every single day and hoping that things will change, and they don't change. And so that's kind of like the sort of the difference, or I guess the bad side of resilience, is that a lot of times, if you're not a go-getter and you're just like, well, here I am right now, and I just want to do the best that I can do, you can get stuck in a situation where, it wasn't abusive for me, but it definitely was kind of abusive to my soul. And then I just like had to react at some point.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction between like being staying where you are and like taking the shots that are coming towards you and seeing that as resilience
Mhm.
versus like taking a more active approach
Mhm.
and kind of I'm imagining, like fighting through the jungle and
Mhm.
cutting all the stuff in front of you, whatever that's called,
Yeah.
and being more active in that and the resilience that comes in that action. And I wonder if maybe that's fits into the distinction between stubbornness and resilience. But
Yeah, it's also like it's taking responsibility as well. It's like God's
Mhm.
given us gifts and abilities, and also our mind, our own mind. And so it's like, well, God, if you want me to change, then like change it for me. And he's like, well, I've given you a mind.
Yeah,
You can change if you want to.
yeah.
And it's not going to come falling out of the sky and fall into your lap. You
Mhm.
have to pursue those things. And so that was something that he had to tell me in a way that was like, well, I'm bringing this other thing to an end.
Mhm.
And so you have no other course of action than to actually do something. And
Wow.
so that's how stubborn I am, is like he's
Mhm.
sometimes he has to take everything, remove everything else in order for me to actually be like, oh, okay. Um, now
Now,
I hear you. Now I see.
yeah, yeah. There, Kelsey and I have been talking about this a lot more recently. Of in Genesis, where God gave Adam the agency to name the animals because he wanted to see what he would name them.
Hmm.
He wants us to have that free will. How unfulfilling would it be if we just sat in one place and God did everything for us?
Yeah,
How
absolutely.
no spiritual formation, no refining in the process.
Mhm.
And so often we're praying like that. And going back to what you were saying of the prayers that you were praying, and it reminded me of James 4:3, where it says, if you pray or if you ask and do not receive, it's because you ask wrongly for your own pleasures.
Mhm.
And I've been obsessed with this phrase recently of shake the snow globe,
Mhm.
where when things are just not changing around you, shake the snow globe, do something different, shake things up, and be careful about that. Don't just leave your job out of nowhere, of course. But how did shaking the snow globe, like leaving your job, entering into a season of unemployment, how did that reshape your perspective on career, work, everything?
Yeah, I mean, when I left, I thought I really don't want to keep doing the same thing that I've done. And so there was almost like this turning away from what I knew was familiar, and I was like, well, this is a great opportunity to sort of make a fresh start, and that can be challenging. You have people that have that you've worked with that are still young, don't have like a ton of responsibilities yet, maybe fresh out of college, and it's like, oh well, this major that I graduated with, what do I do with it, or that sort of a thing. Um, I knew that I was, I have a creative bent, I have a really really curious mind. Um, but when you're my age and you do have a family, you don't have the luxury of just being like, well, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to, it's a fresh start and all of that. I'm the breadwinner in our house, and you know, my family depends on me, and so. But I had the support of my wife in all of this, which was huge.
Mm.
And so I was like, I'm doing this thing, um, and you can come along with me if you want. No, I needed her support in that, and she was really really encouraging. In I think she was thinking, well, he'll go through it and he'll maybe have sort of a better understanding of who he is, and then maybe he can go back to doing what he was doing, and then but just with a fresh perspective,
Mhm.
and that's totally worth it. And I think going into it, we didn't really know, as far as like I'm going to go into this with the called career. When I was looking into that, I didn't really have a good understanding of what it would take.
Mm.
and what it would require of me and sort of the longevity of that, and all of that. I just knew like there had to be something different. Um, and, and I was really, really open to that as
Mhm.
well. I will say, one thing that I did take some time off. So, I took like a month off, and I think that that was really good as well because I was able to, um, sort of pursue other interests, things that I hadn't done in a while. So I really love doing woodworking and all that. So I spent like a month in my
Mhm.
garage, building essentially boxes and that sort of stuff. But it was like because I love getting my hands dirty. And as you know, as a designer, usually you're on a computer and you're working with pixels and all that sort of stuff. And but to able to pursue other passions, um, and I even thought like, oh well, I can be a woodworker. And I
Mhm.
know in other podcasts and whatnot that I've listened, with the call career, it's like there are interests and there are passions, and then there's your calling and all that sort of stuff. And I think that that was God just showing me in that month, like you really like doing this stuff, Travis, but you're that's not what you're going to do for a career.
Mhm.
It is an escape. It's something that you can do, that you enjoy doing, but it's not something that you can do day in and day out. And so that was kind of also a lesson for me in that first month of uh, of just maybe learning more about what I wouldn't do, rather than what my pursuits would be. So I sort of like checked that off the list
Yeah.
immediately. Um, and then the other thing, in this time was, I started getting up early, and I had the time to do that. Like our family's up at 5:15 every morning, get ready for school and all that, and it's still dark outside. And so I would go for, walks in the morning, and they were prayer walks. And so I would get up; it was still dark out, and it was like a mile maybe I would walk, but I would just walk slowly, and I would start the walk with saying, "Okay, God, I'm listening." And then and I would just like be quiet for the first half of my walk. And then for the second half of my walk, I started praying for my neighbors
Mhm.
around me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but God had prompted me to pray that way to get my mind off of myself, because I would start my day without a job, without that sort of pull to do something, without that purpose. And I would be like, well, I don't have a purpose anymore. And with a lot of people, their identity is wrapped up in their job. Um, and and it's even like, well, if I don't have a job, then I don't have a purpose. And
Mhm.
so that's what I was doing, for a good month and a half, is just waking up every morning and doing that prayer walk and praying for each of my neighbors, calling them by name, because if you call them by
Yeah.
name, you have to be very intentional
Yeah.
with it. And it really helped me to sort of, sharpen my focus, um, away from myself,
Mhm.
and just to look around me as well, and then also to focus on God in the morning as well. So that was real
Yeah.
key.
I'm so happy that you shared that because it does get a little murky sometimes
Mhm.
working with people through all of this because it does become very me, me, me.
Mhm.
How am I fulfilled? What do I like doing? And
Mhm.
those conversations are important to have. But ultimately, our work is to serve God
Mhm.
and other people around us.
Mhm.
And so, intentionally having that, going through that separation phase of like, okay, I need to stop with putting me at the center
Yeah.
and recenter my focus and take my identity away from work and remember where my identity is in Christ and
Mhm.
remember that my work is one avenue that's an expression of that identity
Yep.
rather than placing my identity in that.
Mhm.
That's I'm so glad that you shared that. And something that also came up that I wanted to touch on was we realized there was a lot of fear in your career. And you had mentioned this that fear actually was a big motivator for your career for a long time.
Mhm.
So, what did that look like to overcome that fear, to recognize that fear and then overcome it and now approach your career differently?
Yeah, and that still rears its ugly head. I think that's like a lifelong learning process, and I think as humans we're very fallible, and we're prone to fear. Um, when you have and you can, it doesn't take much to go back and to just reflect and see all that God's given you, and everything that you have is not from your own hands but is a gift.
Mm.
And so when you meditate on that fact, things become less fearful, because it's like, I don't, everything that I have in my, my career, the money that I make, the house that I live in, the cars that we have, none of this stuff was from my own hands. I mean, I've had to work for those things, but like foundationally, I didn't, I didn't create these things. And so, um, but as far as like fear within the workplace, um, I don't like to fail.
Mm.
Um, I don't, and I can be a prideful person. Uh, I work in a very shallow industry a lot of times. You are judged always on, the next project or the next project or the next project. People don't look at like your holistic value. They look at the last bit of work that you did. Was this successful? Was this not successful? It's all measured. And so you're constantly having to rise to the challenge, or fall. And so there's always that sort of tension of, am I going to deliver or not? And in advertising, you put yourself in front of the client and you say, hey, I just worked on this thing for 2 months, judge me.
Mm.
And that's a really, really hard thing to do. And a
Yeah.
lot of, and it's not different for other, sectors of industry.
Mhm.
We're judged all the time on our performance. Um, but I saw it as something that was uniquely within the creative field. And so, as far as overcoming that, I have to daily submit those things to God, of saying like, the skills and abilities that you've given me, they're they're not my own. I uh, yeah, I often have to do that more, not just daily, but hourly. So like, I'll be in a meeting,
Mhm.
or going into a meeting, and I'll have to say, God, as I present. I mean, we just prayed before this call,
Mhm.
and it's like, may the words that come out of my mouth, may they be from you to glorify you. When you start taking that focus off of yourself, and you look up and you say, God, um, I need you in all of this. And when you do glorify God, it does take the fear away from things, because it's like,
Yeah.
you've given me those gifts. It's not from me. And so I'm going to step into this thing in faith, knowing that you're with
Mhm.
me. So, and that's like an hourly, sometimes minute by minute thing, because I can totally forget it the next minute and go, but they need this thing right now. And then it's like, okay, you can calm down. God, you're going to give me the time. You're going to make a way. And if you don't, and if they can't accept that, then you have something better for me. If they were to, your biggest fear is like, oh, they're going to let me go, and then my family's going to be destitute.
Mm.
You go to like the worst case scenario.
Mhm.
And so it's also just realizing that God is for you, and he has a plan for you. And even when things do go wrong, like, he's leading you to a better place. He's making all things new. This is all scriptural. And so
Yeah,
we can go
right.
back to the word. Uh, we can find our confidence in that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so well said. And um it's something that I hear a lot from people around me is like, oh, I forget to pray, or I forget to do this and call on God. And I think back to the scripture, I don't know which one it is, but it says, pray without ceasing.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means, it doesn't mean you have to get on your knees before a call or before you're walking into a meeting. It just means those quick conversations with God. I mean, I've recently learned not everybody has an inner dialogue. I know I have an inner dialogue. Sounds like you have an inner dialogue.
Yeah.
Just turning that inner dialogue to God and saying, like, okay, God, having that conversation with Him. And everything that we're talking about here is really reminding me of something that my church has been talking about recently, actually, which is the paradoxical life of being a Christian. And, we even just said it earlier, like, not focusing on me so much. Yet this entire conversation is focusing on your journey, right? And you have to talk about yourself and kind of just finding the balance between all of those things and finding the balance between, okay, I want my career to serve God and serve others, obviously, but I also need to make money. So I need to be in a career that makes that money, allows me to serve my family and all these things. So being very much okay with the paradox of it all. And that's where the grace comes in.
And
That
we
is
always
where
put
grace.
limitations on that too, right? Or we say, I need to make this much money. Why do you need to make that much money? Because you live in this big of a house.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all of those sorts of things. It's like, well, you're limiting God in that. Like if God wants you to have the house, you will have the house.
Mm-hmm.
If he wants you to, if a situation like requires that you move into another house, but we get so afraid, we're like, oh, well, don't take that thing away from me. And it's like, well, but that may not be the best thing for you, or God's maybe taking you in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can limit that and say, well, I can't do that. And it's like, well, you can. You can get rid of your streaming services and all that. No, don't touch my streaming services. But there are so many limitations we put on God, and He's teaching us all the time not to do that.
Yeah. Sometimes the lessons are a little bit more painful than other times.
Yep.
That's just because we need to hear them a little bit more. So you came into this very open-handed, and I think that's very clearly we can see that in this conversation and hear that in this conversation. So we're going through the clarity process together, coming up with some potential career options: interior design, electrician, working with team dynamics, all of these things. And you start your informational interview process. And the informational interviews constantly amaze me with how they help people. I know that they're going to, but people always come back. They're like, I didn't realize they were going to be so helpful because of X, Y, and Z and all these reasons. And God shows up so much through that action. Your story is no exception to that. Can you talk about how informational interviews actually led you to what you're doing now?
Well, I was, so I was actually like in the process of defining my, who I was going to reach out to, the different industries that you mentioned, going back through LinkedIn, which by the way, I didn't have LinkedIn. And so I did at one time. And I remember back 5 years ago, I even had a competition with a coworker to see how many followers we could have just for fun. And so I had, it says over 500 or whatever the number is. And so I was, but it was all, I wasn't using it. And so I had gotten rid of it like a year prior. And so that was the thing that actually I had to open back up again as well. And so the whole process, so I can start really, I'll be as quick as I can. So I like from the beginning, like there's that phase one, and that's where it's really this time of self-discovery. But it's also like reaching out to people and them telling you like, this is how awesome you are. That's essentially what it is. And I think it's like, it was probably one of the most, I mean, I cried several times with the responses that I got. And I think like it's, if nothing else, from what I had gotten from, working with Call Career and coaching, I think that was like, everybody should have that at least one time in their life where they can reach out to people and say, what do you think of me? Yeah. Because we don't ever do that. And the, what you think of yourself is very different from what other people think of you. And so I think, I can't remember what the prompt was, but it was like, hey, I have 5 people, or maybe it was a little bit more than that. I reached out like 20 people because I was like, I just want people to tell, like, this is an opportunity. And I just want to hear what other people have to say. And I would say like 90% of the people responded, and they were long responses. And it it like swelled my soul. But it also taught me a lot about, obviously how people see me and my strengths and all that sort of stuff. And then you start to see those commonalities, and you start to go, oh wow, I didn't know that you saw me that way, or I didn't know I was that way. And so I got through that sort of first phase, and it's like, okay, now we're going to go on and we're going to do these informational interviews. So I had done the again, I had restarted my LinkedIn in again, and I started to do the invites. You have to do it one by one, and then it grows, and you can start to do additional invites. And um, through that process, I started to get people to reach out to me, people that I hadn't talked to in years, and they're like, "I thought we were connected before." And so they started reaching out and saying, "Hey, I would really love to meet with you." And so they were reaching out to me and say, like I hadn't heard from you, and I was looking for you, and I couldn't find you anywhere, and like I wanted to chat with you. And so that happened, like it wasn't a ton, but like 6-8 people, something like that.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, what's going on? And at the same time, I was completing this informational interview thing, and I was like pursuing this. I was like, no, I got to stick to the script. This is part of the process. I'm paying for this to do this, and so I should like be. I should, keep my focus and do this sort of thing. But at the same time, there was sort of like this other thing going on that seemed like it was in the periphery, that was kind of an annoyance. Like, stop talking to me. I'm trying to focus on finding a job,
Yeah.
and who I'm called to be. And so I was like all ready to call, or to reach out to folks through LinkedIn. I had my whole list. I had the spreadsheet, which, by the way, I'm not a spreadsheet lover, but I worked through that as well.
Braved through it.
I did. So I think I was going to pull the trigger on calling, or on reaching out to people like the next day. And I had this former coworker of mine who now works at another agency, and he reached out, and he had reached out like months prior, and he had offered me a position. And this was while I was not working, and I was not ready to go back into it. I was like, no, thank you. I don't want to be a creative director anymore. I know that. But he reached out to me again, and he just pursued me. He said, like, explain to me, like, what are you afraid of? And it was that whole fear thing. And I was confronted with that fear again, but I was in a different position because God had led me through, like, in the process, he led me through a process of discovering how he sees me and how he's created me, where I'm bent, as far as like how I see the world. And a lot of these other jobs that I was looking at were sort of they were aligned with creative director sort of a thing. There were all sort of like these creative things, and I was like, yeah, just don't give me that title. But I want to be creative, and I'm really, really curious and all this sort of stuff. And so it was again limiting God. So he reached out. This guy reached out to me, and he offered me this position again, and he said, but the position, and I didn't really understand this before. He was like, but it's for freelance, and I hadn't done freelance before, and so I finally was like, okay, I'll do it. Like, I kind of like, my family needs money at this point.
Yeah.
But also there was this opportunity, and I saw God's hand in this as well, of a lot of the things that I struggled with before was working in sort of this culture. A lot of times, companies have these cultures, and you having to assimilate to that culture. And it can be a good thing, and it can be a bad thing. And I have found that it has been a bad thing a lot of times. And God was like, hey, you're going to do the same thing, but it's going to look different. And so and then the next day, another coworker of mine, or former coworker of mine, she reached out to me, and she works at a higher ed institution. and she said, "Hey, I really want you to freelance for me." And
That's
she had
crazy.
immediate projects for me and all that sort of stuff. So within 2 days, and I'm continuing to do that today. So that was a couple of months ago, and the
Mhm.
work has only grown with that. And there is nothing but more opportunity for that. And I mean, I'm looking at it right now, and I'm not making the same that I was before,
Mhm.
but there's potential for that, and that's really really exciting to see. Is like I can see how God's like leading me along and actually helping me to adjust to this new, life,
Yeah.
because it's challenging. You're running your own business basically now. You're having to do the bookkeeping stuff as well as the design stuff, and so it's like being able to sort of step into it slowly. Although it hasn't been so slowly. I went on Discovery like the first week, which is basically like flying out to a place and learning about this client that we have. But anyway, so I guess long story short is I was in a sort of like that next step of the called career coaching, and I was all ready to go for it. And God, in His grace, for me, he basically swooped right in and said, "Hey, this is where I want to take you."
Mhm.
And even in that time, and I talked to you about this, I believe, Audrey, where I was like, I kind of feel guilty about not finishing
Mhm.
uh, in my coaching, because I was like, well, I got to go to A to B to C to D, and then I can like look back on all of this and say like, look what I did, and this is where I got because of it. And he basically pulled the rug out from under me and said, no, you have enough. I've given you clarity,
Mhm.
and you can move forward now. And I've done so like in a totally different mindset,
Mhm.
and a totally different approach to even how I think about what I do, and sort of the way that God's even pursued me. Um, and He's done so. My first job was with a Christian higher ed institution, and I get to redefine how they talk about themselves to incoming students. Like that's incredible. So He
Yeah.
just heaps on these things. He doesn't just give you the things that you want. When you pray, He wants to bless you.
Mhm.
And I've had to allow myself to let Him bless me, instead of thinking that, well, it should go this way, and stop talking to me. I got this handled. So.
Yeah. Yes. Travis, there's so many questions I could ask you about that, but if I had to guess a common question that people might have listening to your story, I would think people are wondering, like, oh my gosh, yeah, God is so clearly speaking to him. That's so cool. He can see the blessings. He can see all of this happening and unfolding. How can I see that too? So what would you tell somebody who is going through a career change, or even just in their life in general? How can they have the eyes to see how God is blessing them around or blessing them?
I can only speak for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I am HO, in my humble opinion, that I know when I come to God with expectations of, this is how I want, uh, whatever this direction of my life to go, this next step. Um, he always changes what I think is going to be the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I think I know what's best for me, um, and so I have to I have to submit those expectations to God and say, I'm coming to this without any expectations. And so when I was in the process of in that first phase, and I was like, this is really hard. I just want to give up on this. It was like taking one step and saying, I'm just going to complete these questions. I'm going to complete this next step, this next step, this next step, and not like try to look at the whole picture and see from beginning to end. And then also seeing past that where you're like, well, I'm trying to see where my career is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
by allowing yourself to stay open to things, by just like looking at what's immediately in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've already made the step. If you're deciding like, okay, am I going to do this called career thing? Is this career coaching thing right for me? The biggest thing for me was actually pulling the trigger on signing up for it. I hemmed and hawed on it a lot, and then you sort of have buyer's regret after you're like, okay, what did I get myself into? But then I started it, and then I got to a point where I was like, this is really, really hard,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if I want to continue to do it. And I've paid a lot of money to do it, but I don't know. And so I had to take like these little bite size chunks in that process, and that's what it takes, and that's what like life takes, is like I just have to focus on the thing right in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And because it is a process, you're going to get to the end, but you have to go through all of those things, and God may lead you all the way through that, or he may cut you off, or not cut you off, but just be like, hey, this isn't needed anymore. I've given you your answer. And so I think it's really just stop focusing on what you want the thing to be, and just start focusing on, I mean, there's prayer time, there's being in the word, and then there's just doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It's like, I've been reading in my devotionals about life is full of really, really uninteresting, mundane moments. And that's where God's found. He's found in those mundane moments where we have to trust in him when we don't see what's next.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that's really what I would say, is like you have to, like, it's not rocket science, and it's not actually really interesting. But like that sacrifice of like you having to have it figured out,
Mm.
and just like, if I can just get through today, and then I'll start the next thing tomorrow, but I'm not going to think about that yet. I'm just going to do this. And I mean, God's faithful. So
Yeah.
he's he's going to give you the thing that he wants for you, and it's going to be better than the thing that you want for yourself.
Absolutely. I was thinking, as I was asking that question, I was thinking about how I would answer it, because that was a hard question. And I had the same thoughts in my mind of just do the next right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Take that next right step, what's right in front of you, and surrender your idea of the plan,
Mm-hmm.
the expectations. One of my favorite prayers to pray, which feels crazy to say in prayer, is God, give me a story I wouldn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps me lay down my expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And then he shows up and he gives you the story that you wouldn't expect. You're like, whoa. And you realize just how crazy that prayer is. Just be like, I'm open. I'm open. And when I say crazy, I mean, it just feels crazy because you're surrendering that control.
Yeah.
But that really does give you the eyes to see really what he's doing, because you're no longer fixated on what you want for your life, and rather you're surrendered to what he has for you, which, as you mentioned, is going to be greater than anything that you're going to come up with, anything either of us, any of us, are going to come up with. So your story is such a good example of that. There are seriously so many questions that I could ask you, but I won't keep you forever. I really, just for everyone listening, I pray that you're able to take something from this, and that allows you to just look at what's in your life today. What's in your life today, and what can you do today that just helps you take that next step? That is my prayer. Thank you, Travis. I am so excited to see all the other opportunities that come to you as you are also doing the next right thing. And thanks for sharing.
Yes, and thank you for having me. This has been awesome.
Good. I'm so glad.
All right. Well, take care. Bye
Bye.
now.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. To get an even more meaningful head start into your calling, head to thecalledcareer.com, where my fellow career coach Audrey and I have created a whole suite of free resources and tools to help you get clear and get a job today. For those who are definitely ready to land a job or start a business in the next 6 to 12 months, we're here to help you biblically and practically discern your calling through coaching, reflection, and deep market research, identify the job that's aligned with it, even if you currently have no idea what you want, rebrand your resume and LinkedIn to translate your background to appeal to your future boss. P.S. We take this off your plate and do this for you. Also, we'll teach you how to land referrals and get attention from leadership through networking. Again, if that makes you nervous, we have these emails and LinkedIn messages literally written for you so you don't have to sweat. We're also here to give you unlimited interview practice so you're prepared to address every elephant in the room and knock selling yourself out of the park. Then we'll round out with helping you negotiate your salary so you land thousands more. Just so you know, recent clients have gotten $8,000 to $50,000 salary increases, even though they were totally non-traditional candidates. That's because we specialize in helping non-traditional career pivoters land jobs they're ecstatic to serve in. It takes work, but we're here to see you through until the end, when we're celebrating that day that you send me an email in all caps and you say, Kelsey, I got the job. Then you could be on the podcast. But I'll be here until then, keeping you accountable and encouraged by meeting with you literally until you land the job you want, even if that's up to 6 months from now within our program. Apply to join at thecalledcareer.com, and I'll see you next week here at Answer the Call. Bye for now.